How many of you have either listened to or read Christopher West's materials on theology of the body? Hands up. Okay, most of you. How many of you have read any of the Vatican II documents or listened to or watched any explanation of the documents? Hands up. 1.5. Oh, Vatican II documents. Have you read any of them? Oh, okay, some of them? Okay. So more of you, a lot more of you are familiar with theology of the body than Vatican II. And yet Pope John Paul II, who wrote Theology of the Body, called Vatican II, quote, the greatest grace of this century, quote, the Magna Carta for the future of the Church. And in fact, John Paul II's pontificate was devoted to implementing Vatican II and to making it better known. Vatican II is the blueprint, the program for renewing the church, and by renewing the church, transforming the world. And in fact, if we were to ask John Paul II, what's more important for us to study, Vatican II or theology of the body, he would say Vatican II. So why are we so interested in this subject? And this is the question that we'll answer by the end of the night. Just a brief introduction on theology of the body. It was written by John Paul II and delivered in a series of Wednesday audiences between 1979 and 1984. 129 separate audiences. Every Wednesday the Pope has an audience, and it still goes on today. Now, what is it about? A lot of people think sex, but not exactly. It's actually about what it means to be human, who we are as human beings. It's an anthropology. But because sexuality greatly helps us understand what it means to be human, there is a heavy focus on sexuality in marriage. Now, most people, and I know I have a Catholic audience tonight, but most people at this point, when they think about the Catholic Church and sexuality, roll their eyes and say, what do a bunch of, or why should I listen to a bunch of celibate old men who have who teach all these outdated, old-fashioned, rigid views on something they know nothing about, right? And their followers, how can they believe that nonsense? They must be blind lemmings. That's what Jennifer Parks of the Edmonton Sun thought too before she interviewed me. In 2007, I was helping run Theology on Tap in Edmonton. Now, if anybody doesn't know what Theology on Tap is, it's basically a series of talks sponsored by the church and held at a local bar, usually for young adults in their 20s and 30s. And I was helping Nick Simone out, who was the youth pastor at Holy Family Parish in St. Albert. And I was in charge of publicity. So I was supposed to get a hold of all the media outlets and try to get the word out about it. So I told them all the same thing. I'm a 29-year-old virgin. I'm a member of the Catholic Church, and my church is sponsoring a series of talks about sex at one of the local bars. And the media just ate it up. And one of them was Jennifer Parks, and she wrote a syndicated article in the Sun papers called The Sex Files. It was a weekly article that came out, and it was very racy. It was almost X-rated. And she was fascinated with this. She thought it seemed like such a contradiction. And before the interview, she was very skeptical. But by the end, she was quite impressed. And I'll just read a little bit of the article. I have a copy for you all. I'll hand it out later. She begins, the best sex advice I have received lately came from a virgin. What could a 29-year-old Catholic man who'd never experienced the pleasures and passions of sexuality, let alone a single kiss, have to teach the rest of us on the topic? But she says later on, still, I heard him out, and I'm glad I did. What she discovered was we Catholics make a lot of sense when it comes to sexuality. She didn't agree with everything. But she did agree with a lot, and she left with a great respect for our views and the reasons behind it. So, I think those of us now have a Catholic audience. If anybody wasn't Catholic here, I would ask you to hear me out, just as Jennifer Parks did. I know I sometimes look like a stodgy old professor, but don't judge a book by the cover, right? Section 2, Theology, or Part 2, Theology of the Body and Revelation. For us Christians, our main source of knowledge about what it means to be human and about sexuality and marriage comes from, naturally, the Bible. And it might surprise a lot of people that marriage and sexuality are a central theme in the Bible. The Bible begins with a marriage and it ends with a marriage. And we'll get into that later. So marriage and sexuality are essential in helping us not only interpret the Bible, but also to understand Christianity. And the Bible begins with the creation of the world. And in the first chapter, you have God who creates the world in 6 days. A lot of people roll their eyes. If this was scientific history that the biblical writers were trying to convey, then maybe we should roll our eyes. But it's not scientific history. It's intended to be a theological history. The biblical writer is concerned with why things happened, not what happened. What does it mean? What's its purpose? Besides the Bible, we have the Catechism, and that organizes the teachings of the Church, which are based on the Bible, into an orderly system arranged according to topics. I'm going to give you 4 quotations from the Catechism, which will help answer those questions that the biblical writers were trying to teach us. Why did this happen? What does it mean? First of all, Catechism, paragraph 319. I have those down in your outlines. God created the world to show forth and communicate His glory. His glory is the great being that He is, all His great qualities, His perfections. Okay? He's omnipotent, all-powerful. He's omniscient, all-knowing. And He's omnibenevolent, all-good. Everything that makes Him God. Number 2, Catechism, paragraph 299. The universe was created in the image of the invisible God. Okay. Invisible. We'll talk about that later. That's going to be important later in section 2. But now we'll deal with this word image. We think about image in terms of reflection. When we look in the mirror, we see an image of ourselves. Or when somebody paints a portrait, that's an image of that person that was painted. The universe and everything in it is sort of a reflection of God, and it bears some resemblance to Him. But that reflection is dull. It's like when you look at yourself in a puddle, and the puddle ripples. But it's still a reflection of God. Let's look at that reflection. If anyone has your Bibles with you, as Dr. Scott Hahn says, those of you who have your Bibles with you, open them, and those who don't have your Bibles are probably cradle Catholics. I was at Holy Family Parish one day. Most of you probably know Father Penna. He's from this diocese. And he was giving a homily at Holy Family Parish in St. Albert one time. They've borrowed him from us and still haven't given him back. But he asked one time, he was at Mass, he says, anybody have their Bibles with them? I put my hand up, and there's about 5 of us there in a church of 500. And anyway, it would do us, but we're going to dig a lot into the Bible, so next time, bring it. Okay, Genesis chapter 1. verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay. And then later, verse 14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heavens to separate the day from the night." And verse 16. Verse 17, and God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth. Okay, so you have time, and you have the sun and the moon. Now, verse 11. And God said, well, let's begin with verse 6. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Okay. And God separated the waters above from the waters below. And verse 9, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." So there we have God creating space. And he creates the sky, the sea, and the land. And then we go to verse 11. And God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, the fruit-bearing trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind." And the earth brought forth vegetation. Verse 20, and God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above." Verse 21, so God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters." And verse 24, we see the same thing, creates the animals. And so in the sky, you have this space, the sky, the sea, and the land. In the sky, you have birds. The sea, you have the fish. In the land, you have the animals. And they are told and commanded to multiply, be fruitful, and fill the earth, fill that space that they've been put in. So the sky, the sea, and the land, they're like this empty space that basically says, "I exist to be filled. That is my purpose. I exist to be filled with life." Now, the world and man are both created in God's image. And there are similarities. With humanity, there's an empty space too, and that's the womb. And it is also to be increasingly filled with life. It is a space that says, "I exist to be filled."